All right, welcome to Faces and Places in Fashion here at FIT. I know we have a lot of guests and alumni, so welcome. We're always happy to have you. Every week we get together on Mondays at 4:15 to hear a lecture given on any sort of topic related to fashion or design. And today we're especially happy to have Anthony Casalena, who's the CEO and founder of Squarespace. Before I get into his bio, a couple of quick announcements. I was just asked, apparently all of you made one person do this, but about your papers next week. I understand that you have another big exhibition paper due also next week, so I'm going to make the paper due in 2 weeks.
You miss being in college?
All right. So
I'll take credit for that.
Thank you. All right. So 2 weeks from today, your paper is due for those of you who are in the class. I'm the nicest guy in the world. Look at that. All right. So without further ado, let's get into today's speaker, Anthony Casalena. He's the founder and CEO of Squarespace, which he started from his dorm room in 2003. During the company's early years, Anthony acted as the sole engineer, designer, and support representative for the entire Squarespace platform, allowing for it to be stable business from the onset. In addition to his main responsibilities in running the company and setting overall product strategy, he remains actively involved in the engineering, design, and product teams within the Squarespace organization. Anthony holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from the University of Maryland. And I'm going to, just a little later on, I'll put back up the Twitter handles and hashtags. So if you'd like to connect with him or to ask any questions using Twitter, you're more than welcome to throughout the presentation. Before I turn the time over to Anthony, and today, our conversation is going to be moderated by Dalia Strum, who is a professor here at FIT, and she's been instrumental in helping us get a lot of great speakers this semester, including Anthony. But before we get started, we're going to have a video. This is the commercial that ran during the Super Bowl for Squarespace.
Click here. Click here. You may have a virus.
Please. Like this.
31% off. Lower your mortgage.
People who bought this also bought this.
We can't change what the web has become, but we can change what it will be. A better web starts with your website, Squarespace.
All right, so I'll turn the time over to Dalia Strum and Anthony Casalena. Welcome.
I'm going to give you a round of applause. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thanks for having me.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
How much time and prep did that take to go into that?
That took a lot of time. So for 30 seconds, that took about 7 months. I think we did an all-hands presentation after it aired, which it's like the 17 steps in creating a Super Bowl ad. And it's everything from just the creative process to the pitch deck, to getting director's treatments back, to casting, to filming, to editing, color correction, just everything that goes into it. It's a lot of work for 30 seconds.
I'm sure, and it was fantastic. You were able in 30 seconds to really communicate a message and a story. What did you think the residual results were? Did you see them? Were you able to track them?
Yeah, so obviously Super Bowl ad is a huge risk, and this is new for us. We just started doing television advertising in September. The way to look at the Super Bowl ad is primarily 3 things. Normal ads have 2 of these things, and I think Super Bowl has a little extra. The thing that Super Bowl has that's extra is just press, right? I mean, we put an ad out there, and we normally don't go on CNBC and Bloomberg speaking about the ad we ran and having them run it for free. We had about 250, maybe a little more press hits from the ad running, which is fantastic. The other things we look at are just direct response, which is people signing up and saying they heard about us during the Super Bowl, and also brand awareness. So we conducted a brand awareness survey before and after the ad, where we were trying to figure out, using what's called assisted recall, like how many people had heard of Squarespace just in the general population. And we found that it went up from maybe 1 in 5 in the 18 to 35 age group to about 1 in 3, US across all education levels. So yeah, it's something we attempted to quantify and track.
That's interesting. That's an interesting number. Really quickly, by the way, feel free to tweet with us because we'd love to hear any questions or comments that you guys have to say. So 1 in 3, why did that number increase in that core segment?
Well, the Super Bowl ad is huge. So 50 million viewers at least. Just massive traffic spike after it, love like the which we've never really seen before. So it's one of the most watched. It's the most watched event, I think, on American television, and one of the few events that people watch explicitly for the ads, which just amplifies that effect. So going from 1 in 5 to 1 in 3 is just a huge success for us.
Definitely. So give us the scoop. Starting in your dorm room, how did you start Squarespace?
Sure. So I started Squarespace about 10 years ago. So I'll give you a really quick version of it, and then you can ask me questions around whatever parts you think are interesting. So I've always been a designer and an engineer, software design, and I wanted to create a website for myself back in 2003. And was really unhappy with what was out there. So there were 2 primary drivers for wanting to create Squarespace. So we obviously didn't invent making websites, but we wanted to do things a little bit differently. The 2 drivers are basically that I wanted something that was all-in-one. I didn't like that the page builder software and the photo management software and the blogging software and the statistics software and the hosting were all separate things. I thought they should be one unit. And the other thing was that, and perhaps it's why I'm here talking, is that your website's really your online identity. It's essentially your online clothing. It's how people are going to perceive your ideas, see who you are, and that packaging is really important. And Squarespace has always been a design-centric company from the start, and it was that thing that we were really building into it from the beginning. So just your presentation matters, your design matters, and back at the time, and even somewhat today, I was really not compelled by all these sort of like bargain bin $2.99 web hosting products out there that didn't seem to understand style or presentation or content management at all. And so it's kind of horrific to think that those would represent my online identity. And you see us even with that Super Bowl ad fighting that fight today and drawing a distinction between Squarespace, this company that's going to represent your identity online, and sort of all these other things out there. And it's sort of the Super Bowl ad is about, you're about to put something on the web. What are you going to be a part of? Are you going to be a part of this mess, or are you going to put something clean and nice out there? And so that's kind of the core message behind it. So I started it for those 2 reasons. I ran it essentially, it's had maybe 3 big chapters to its life. I ran it almost by myself for 3 years. And it was called a company, but it was more of a project when you're one person, not really a company. And did all the design and engineering and customer care, and was completely stressed out towards the end of that. There was another 3-year phase where I started hiring people and grew the company to about 30 people over the next 3 years, and made tons and tons of mistakes in my hiring, and learned all kinds of things about building culture and what can go right and what can go wrong. And then there's the current phase, which has been the past 3.5 years, which has been just a tremendous phase for us. And it, the key marker was that we accepted a pretty big investment about 3.5 years ago, and that investment was centered around structuring the company so that we could really make a dent in this space and do something a little bit bigger. I felt like at the end of those 6 or 7 years when I first started it that, it was good. It was making, tens of millions of dollars. It was over $10 million, not tens yet, but it was making money. But it really wasn't making a dent in the space like I had hoped it would. And so sort of took a long, hard look at ourselves and said, okay, let's change some things about this company. Let's change what executives are in the room. Let's change what the software does. And so that brings us to kind of chapter 3 in Squarespace, which is the one that is the one producing these kinds of ads. And it's really about fundamentally creating a platform that changes how people publish online, making that stuff very accessible to consumers, making these very beautiful websites, and really solving problems for people. So,
trying to live tweet, but it's not working out really well. So you breezed past really quickly that you were all stressed out during college, but that's a core time for you.
Yeah.
So we have some fantastic entrepreneurs that are doing great things at this school. How did you manage schoolwork and building a full-fledged company, even though at the time you might not have realized that it was going to be a company?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2005, and I started Squarespace. Squarespace launched in 2004, January 2004. And so I actually sort of cheated in a way, in the sense that I stayed for a fifth year and really took very few classes. So I spent all my time on Squarespace, and it was this nice little limbo world between my parents asking me where I was going to get a job and having to actually make that decision because I was in school. So I don't know if that helps.
So words of wisdom, stay in school extra time.
What's that?
Words of wisdom, stay in school a little bit longer.
Take one class.
So tell us about the process. I mean, what made you, so where did you come up with the idea? Like, when did it really spark for you that this is something that I need to do? It's burning inside of me.
So again, I was making it for myself. I just really, really disliked what was out there, and I, programmer, and I like making things. So I made it for myself initially, and I think that there was one situation early on in the first month of it where I think I was showing it off to one of my friends, and he said something ridiculous like, "Oh, I'll give you $200 for that, $300 for that." I'm like, it's not worth that. I mean, it's just this thing I kind of hacked together, but this thing has potential. There really is nothing that's doing this thing really, really well, and so just due to making it for myself and then seeing that other people wanted it also, that kind of is how it got started.
Yeah. I think it's an inspiring story. When somebody offers you money, you know you have a product.
There you go. One customer.
One customer, that's all you need. So
Wow.
Did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
I didn't set out and go, I need to start a business. I set out to solve something for myself and then got sort of compelled to doing this. It wasn't supposed to be this money-making thing, or I saw this niche or something like that. It was very, very organic.
So you realized that you had a business, and then obviously you had to stay pretty scrappy in order to acquire customers. How did you create awareness? How did people find out that your platform existed, and how were you able to envision best strategies for them to use it?
It wasn't actually clear from the get-go that I had a business. It took 7 or 8 months to launch it. It takes time to create the products, and while I had this early interest, it wasn't like this proven thing. I put it out there in January 2004 and actually bought $100 in Google AdWords at the time. And Google's a lot smaller back then, so the competition was not as fierce on Google AdWords, although there was some competition. And really investing in marketing, actually, but doing it kind of intelligently and not doing it in this uncontrolled way, putting it out there, getting 3 customers, reinvesting in the business, just constant reinvestment in the business that allowed it to sort of exist.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting strategy. So if you were launching today, what strategy would you utilize?
In what industry?
I mean, I guess specifically fashion and marketing.
Fashion and marketing? Well, I wouldn't know the first thing about doing that. So take what I'm saying with a huge grain of salt. No, but
let's use your platform.
Trying. I think that you've got to get a base of early adopters that love you, and hopefully you're creating things, if you're launching something, because you like them for yourself, and other people are going to agree with your personal style. And I think that participating in various communities and just getting in front of people is going to be really important, but not trying to start too big. You can get a lot of attention by just being a great participant in whatever communities you care about.
So it's interesting because Squarespace essentially is able to target different areas in the market, and we're seeing a lot more people focus on individual sites. Where did that concept come from? How are you able to get people into the mindset that they really need to have personal branding behind their site?
So it's something we're still doing. Squarespace's customer base is a split between individuals and small businesses, probably trending more towards small businesses now. Although there was this huge push for portfolio sites early in Squarespace, and we did that because these were sites that were incredibly difficult to create. I mean, these are image-heavy sites, video-heavy sites, lots of media, crazy presentations. And we thought that if we could solve those, we can solve the other kinds of sites. We've really had kind of a scaling of ambition along the way, up from just my own personal site, which was just my own personal site. It was a blog for myself. It wasn't a business. It wasn't anything like that. Through blogging, and then as we built a bigger platform, portfolios, now you see on the front side this verticalized approach where Squarespace works for restaurants and small businesses and portfolios and all these things, but that was that just took a lot of time. But that was about focusing on one thing at the beginning and then letting it go up from there.
Yeah. So in terms of businesses, small businesses, how are they best utilizing your platform, and how does it increase, I guess, their communication with their customers?
Well, I think the primary thing it does, the primary two things it does is one, it's do it yourself. So for $8 to $30 a month, someone who doesn't have $100,000 to spend on the website can get something that looks really, really great. The second thing is it looks really, really great. So a lot of times people, on Squarespace kind of appear more polished or more serious than they would otherwise be perceived because of the amount of detail that goes into the design. We've actually had customers win design awards with our default templates, which is always kind of funny.
That is funny. Where did that happen?
It was a CSS award thing. I think it happened once or twice.
Wow, that's really cool.
People they didn't realize it was a template. So
did they at least give you credit?
No, we don't want the credit. Oh. It's the key thing about a good template is it's a framework for your ideas. It shouldn't look like a template. No one should really be able to identify that it was a Squarespace site or a Squarespace template. It should really be about your work and putting that front and center. And so we really design all of our templates with that in mind.
So I guess you're focused more on e-commerce. How is that, I guess, helping your business and also helping customers iterate on the products that they have featured and opportunities to sell?
So we launched a commerce platform about a year and a month ago at this point, which enables our sites to, enables any of our customers to sell things on their sites. They can sell physical products, digital products with downloads or services. It's kind of a no-brainer for us. It's been one of the top requested features since we launched. It just took a long time to get it right. We built our own commerce platform from the ground up. And it's a natural evolution of what a lot of people are doing on the platform. So we have this thing internally that's sort of the framing architecture for Squarespace and what we work on, which we call the ideation narrative, which is just this concept of an idea growing up over time. And so, it starts with an idea, and then you get a domain, you put your website out there, and then your ideas grow up into a website, and then you launch that to the world. And there's all these things that happen before you make a website, and there's all these things that happen after you make a website. You market it, you keep in touch with your customers, you might sell things, you have analytics, you want to see what's happening on your site. And so Squarespace operates within this little spectrum, and the commerce part of it is just a natural extension of that idea.
I have to give you a lot of credit. You've acquired a huge skill set just by launching your own company and really focusing on user acquisition and opportunities in the market. How did you teach yourself this? Where did this come from?
I guess making a lot of mistakes. I mean,
Tell us about some of those mistakes. Let's get juicy.
Yeah, let's get juicy. No, I mean, most of. I think some of the things that have served Squarespace well, I think in myself well, is one, just trying to be really self-aware when something's not working out, trying to figure out what the worst things are about Squarespace and how I'm operating, and actively seeking out that negative advice, because I think a lot of times that nobody wants to really say bad things to you. You have to kind of go and seek that stuff out on your own. And being open to it, and just because you're seeking out negative advice doesn't mean you need to agree with it, but you should at least see if it's there or not. We see negative things all the time about Squarespace, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but at least we're seeing them. And so I think that's really important, that sort of self-awareness.
So how did you seek out some of the negative feedback initially? Because obviously people don't always post about that online. I think it's more interactions, right?
They write in, they're not afraid to do that. No, I mean, sometimes it does get posted online. Sometimes people do tweet about things in today's age. We actively monitor all of that. We actively monitor forums and Twitter and Facebook and our email queues and everything else, and try and keep our finger on the pulse of what people are asking for and how they're perceiving us.
So you mentioned before that you made some hiring mistakes. How did you learn from that?
I think that these days I'm a lot better when something viscerally feels wrong, to shorten the time between it feeling really wrong and me actually making the decision to part ways with somebody or to enter into a difficult emotional conversation. I think when I was younger, not that I'm that old, but when I was younger, that would just stretch out for longer periods of time, and I would sit there and fight with myself. And am I right? Am I wrong? And just it doesn't need to take that much time. And I'm not saying to act impulsively, but sometimes your success in life is going to be proportional to how many hard conversations you want to have. So. Does that strike a chord for you, or?
I guess. I mean, I think that I think it's very tough when you're trying to figure out what makes sense and what type of people are going to make sense for your culture. So I guess that's kind of what I was leading towards. What how did you know what the company culture was going to be like? How did you know, just in terms of work hours? I mean, if you take a look at Google, they'd rather have people stay there through the night as opposed to going home. So they would be okay with people getting in a little bit later if they had to.
Yeah, we're like that. I think. We don't track hours. We don't even track vacation days. That
was one of my favorite things about you guys.
Never did open vacation days.
Yeah,
it's just. I mean, it's funny, right? There's no formal tracking of it, but if you're suddenly gone for a lot of time, we're going to wonder why you don't seem to like work. So it's almost like an open invitation to abuse it in a way. But it's funny. I mean, it's so infrequently caused a problem. I mean, it is always if that's actually what the problem is, somebody is just really unhappy at work.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're looking for in terms of culture is a number of things. We're looking for a lot of alignment. We're looking for people who would do this anyway, right? Who would go and program anyway. I always think back to when I was a kid and think that, I wasn't learning programming. I wasn't designing because of some business reason. I just liked doing it. And so it is great to work around people who are just like that. They just like the same things as you. You're aligned. We look for communication as well. Are these people easy to talk to, or is everything misunderstood when we have a conversation? So those are two pretty big things. Another thing we look for in the culture is judgment. If somebody is just let out on their own, are 9 out of 10 of their decisions going to be things that we agree with, or are they going to be these random, wacky decisions that seem to have no underlying reasons? So I'd say keeping those three things in mind during hiring are really, really important.
So kind of hitting on that, how did you, when you first started bringing people into your company, obviously those were the really important decisions that you had to make. How were you able to sort through your network and just decide that this person's going to be a good fit, this person's really going to add value, skill set, etc.?
I mean, it was looking for those characteristics, and I think early on I did a pretty bad job at it. I think that, I'm serious, I did a really bad job at it.
No, I love that you're telling us that.
Yeah. And it's that, I think that hiring is such a flawed, difficult thing, right? I mean, you spend such a little time with somebody, and you have to make this really big decision from that limited amount of time that you spend with somebody. And so we've gotten a lot better at doing the rigorous technical interview stuff as well as the soft interview as well. And I think that what you fall trapped to a lot during hiring is there's this great book. It's not even about hiring. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's just about how people's brains work and stuff like that. It's a great book. You should read it. But one thing that they
Tweet that.
one thing that they talk about in the book is that people like to replace difficult questions with easy ones when they can't answer the difficult one. So you tell yourself a story, like you're interviewing somebody and you don't really know how to interview them, and well, they seem really nice, and there's these couple of facts from their past that we can just zero in on. They must be right for the job. And your interviews might look like that unless you've really spent the time to look at what are the 10 or 15 things that I need this person to do, and are they actually capable of these things, and did I actually score them, and did I write these down? I mean, so I would just caution that if you're doing hiring, try to really come up with a strict set of what you're looking for and make a little scorecard and write it down and force yourself to write down why you think that person deserves the score you wrote down, or were you just wishing that the score should be that? Because hiring's grueling and you have to go through all these, just so many people to find people who are a good fit.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny because we met at a different event, and the one thing that I found to be really interesting that you mentioned is essentially you're taking money out of your pocket and paying that person.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. What was that emotional feeling?
I think what she's referring to is so for the first 7 years of the company, essentially, the only money that Squarespace raised was like 30 grand for my dad to buy the servers and do like some early AdWords and things like that. So when I was alone in the company, I would just, any money it would make, I would just reinvest and pay myself some of it, whatever. And 3 years in, when you are in a situation where you're overloaded and trying to do everything yourself, and it comes down to the point where you want to hire people, you're really, I mean, it's money I could keep, right? I could just keep it instead of hiring somebody. And so it's so simple, but it's true. And it makes you think about it, hiring out of a position of pain and how much it really costs to put somebody on payroll. You know, 1 or 2 bad hires at Squarespace is like driving a Ferrari off of a building every year, you know, if those people are in the room. So it's a lot of money. And so, yeah, I just always kind of came at it from that perspective. And that perspective was born from the fact that, you know, I was just a sole owner for a long time. It's different now, but we try and keep that same perspective around, you know, is this person really adding a contribution? What else can we do with money? Stuff like that. How you spend the resources that you have and how quickly you spend it and how quickly you spend it on the right things is really critically important to how a business is going to grow.
I think that's probably one of the most valuable things that I felt from the last conversation, because it's true. You really need to be able to make better decisions in terms of what you're spending money on as opposed to wasting. And if you really need to hire somebody, that's when you're willing to spend it. It's funny because I teach a social media marketing class, and people say to me all the time, "Can I just hire somebody for this?" You can, but don't you want to know the people that you're talking to first? Don't you want to figure out what your company sounds like? So I think that just hearing your perspective on it is so valuable. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's really interesting because you guys have some fashion.
One thing on that's interesting. We're very anti-consultant usually. We don't like outsourcing almost anything. We like bringing the talent internally to be able to do things, everything from our media buying to our programming to our designs. Only very recently, and the company's much bigger now, Squarespace is like 280 people. Only very recently have we been able to have successful kind of contractors. And I think the thing that you have to realize about hiring contractors is that you're not building your company's DNA. When that contract is over, that skill set's gone, versus bringing it in-house, really understanding it, and trying to build a competency yourself. So.
I agree, definitely. I think that's super valuable. So something interesting is that you guys have a couple of fashion companies that utilize your platform.
Yeah.
So Michael Kors uses it for their lifestyle blog, or Darte uses it for their full site, and Marc Jacobs uses it internally.
Yeah, he uses it internally for some things. Bottega Veneta has like a little micro site for one of their art collaborations on it and things like that.
So did any of them approach you, or did they decide to use it on their own, or did you approach them?
They actually all decided to use it on their own, which is neat.
Yeah.
As hard as that is to believe. the other way they find us is that we have a lot of designers and small agencies that build sites for people on Squarespace. And so like the Michael Kors thing was a design firm that really liked us. And so they started building on the developer platform we have and built that site out. So
I think the loyalty is super strong, but how did Marc Jacobs figure out how to use it internally?
I'm not sure. We'd have to ask him.
What do they use to feature? I mean, it's interesting to see
Yeah.
your product being utilized in so many different ways, right? So
I think internally, how it's probably used is like an internal updates blog where you've basically got a bunch of people in the company and you want them to be aware of certain things. And so they're probably posting on it internally just to keep an eye on certain trends and things like that.
interesting. I just think that it's so fantastic that they're able to really take your platform, adapt it to their needs,
Yeah.
and find like mutual success in that.
Yep.
So kind of turning the conversation around, I know that we have different segments in the audience. We have entrepreneurs, but we also have undergrads that are interested in figuring out what the next steps are for them. So do you think if you could do it all over again, you would have started your company, or you would have maybe potentially worked for another company, learned the ropes of the game, and figured out maybe a year or two down the line?
I did work for another company for when I was in high school. I had an internship at a web startup during the internet bubble, which was amazingly valuable. I actually think it's a great idea for people to work somewhere else before trying to start their own thing. I mean, I certainly did. Yeah, I mean, there's just going to be so many lessons you're going to learn from seeing this stuff internally that you would otherwise never get exposed to. So I would actively encourage you to do that.
So what were some of those lessons that you learned in high school that you took away to college?
Working as an intern at this thing, and what did I learn? What did I learn? I think one of the things that was really striking, it was a tech company that had non-technical people who were like running it, and that was a really bad formula. So you should have tech companies run by tech people, I think. At least when they're small. Because otherwise you don't know the details on how anything's created, and you might say things that are a little bit ridiculous because you don't know how it's all put together. And when you're small, being able to actually, I mean, like Squarespace was only able to exist for 3 years without any like funding or anything because I was just doing everything. And so like imagine how much money that saved the company versus not only I can't do anything, but I can't figure out how to hire the people who are going to do that stuff because I don't even know how to interview them because I'm not technical. So I think that's a really big one.
Okay, I think that's a big one too. So in terms of your internal department, do you typically, how does it work with interns and then hiring them?
We actually don't have a lot of interns, which is a pretty big difference between us and the fashion industry. I don't know. We're still developing those programs internally. But the few interns we've had, we just treat them like a junior engineer. I mean, they're doing everything else that our normal engineers would do. But we just have different expectations on what we want from the role. So.
But you have other positions, right? So like you have marketing positions. You have. I noticed that you work with quite a few universities, so you're building out those different strategies. So there are opportunities to work with those aspects as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's hiring across the entire company. So if you go to squarespace.com/careers, the open positions are there, and it's all listed out. Yeah.
So we have quite a few students here that would obviously be interested in some of your advice. Do you have advice to give them moving forward while they're still in college and potentially launching their own companies or starting with new other companies?
Yeah. I think a lot of it's kind of come out in this conversation, but I think you've got to really be doing something that you kind of want to do anyway, even if there's no like monetary reason, just because you like it. And I would caution around chasing short-term money, essentially.
Okay, I think that's a good piece of advice. What else should people be thinking about right now, especially if they're considering starting their own company?
I think, why they're doing that. I mean, I think a lot of people, seriously, I
Yeah,
mean, a lot of
definitely.
people come to me for advice, and, you know, they've got this like wild business idea or something like that. And it's just like, why do you want to do this? You know, like, why? And one of the worst answers that I hear is, one, zany business ideas where we're going to make money. And then two is this notion of like being your own boss or something and like having like a ton of control. You are going to get beaten into every single direction by your customer. I mean, it's going to pale in comparison to having to deal with one or two people at the company where you work. So it's very 24/7 when you first start something out. There's no safety net. You're not going to make any money forever, and it's going to suck. So just to have that other reason for why you want to do it, and it'll make that part at least be worth tolerating.
I think that's pretty good advice. Was there ever a point when you started and you said, when you actually started looking at it as a business and you said, I'm going to give myself until X amount of time before I give up?
Before I give up? No, because I think from the beginning, you know, even at the end of the first year, it was at least self-sustaining for me. And so it didn't really hit it never really hit a plateau point where I was in it for like years and years and years going, wow, this is really going nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if somebody were starting a company right now,
Mm-hmm.
what amount of time do you think is reasonable before they say, this isn't working, people aren't interested in this, I'm not reaching my customer, I need to reevaluate?
Well, I think you need to be constantly looking at, you know, negative signals and trying to figure out where you really are. I wouldn't, it's kind of circumstantial. I mean, like it's certain kinds of, the answer is going to be different for like a pharmaceutical company versus, you know, a software company versus, a fashion company where I don't even understand, for instance, like the startup costs or really what it is to create something and how to get that produced and how factories work and all that. So I'm not sure.
We have
But
all
you definitely
these-
want a checkpoint.
What's interesting is now that we have an opportunity in terms of fashion meeting tech, we have all these platforms that are evolving where they don't necessarily have to run a whole ream of product in a certain period of time. You can create a sample, see if that sells, and then according to that, make
Yeah.
better decisions and ordering. So I think that we're at this influx point where technology is meeting fashion, and we have this opportunity to make those better decisions. So as a tech company, what do you think a reasonable amount
I
of time
think
is?
technology is going to affect every single industry on the planet. It's obvious that it already is. And I think that what you need to do if you were starting a fashion company is look for the very best building blocks you can possibly find to start your company. I mean, completely self-serving, but Squarespace for $8 to $30 a month, pretty good choice. I mean, in terms of like setting up a website and trying to get some traction, I mean, you're not really going to regret that decision. You may need to, invest in a developer later, but it's very unlikely that $8 is going to be like the biggest mistake you made when starting your business. But along those lines, there's other things that are going to be available in the marketplace where people are solving things at scale, and it means you don't need to solve things anymore. There's fulfillment services, there's payment gateways, fulfillment services like Shipwire and things like Stripe that handle payments. These things didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, and I think it's very important to integrate with those things early on and not waste your time recreating those things, especially when you're small. So, we see that from a technological perspective constantly internally. Things that were very hard for us to build 5 and 10 years ago are now easy because of components that are in the marketplace that otherwise weren't there. So that's one of the advantages you have over a big company. And the big company probably built up a lot of things and existed. It was built in a different time when there were different components available, and some of their systems are legacy and bad. And you've got the opportunity to start from zero. So you can start with all modern things. So make it as modern as possible.
So do you guys have any interesting things on the horizon that we should be looking out for?
We have lots of interesting things on the horizon. But unfortunately, I can not talk about our public roadmap.
Okay.
But what you'll see when I was talking about that ideation narrative and the kind of ideas coming to life, Squarespace kind of completing more things in that spectrum. I think that after doing this for 10 years, it doesn't really excite me to come to work and just think about making like more websites. It's not really that interesting. We have certain things on the roadmap which are an evolution of websites, which I think is incredibly interesting to me. And but it's really building out that story around the site, everything from the inception of ideas to what it takes to have a small business functioning successfully online. And so long as we can continue to make a dent in the way we're doing it, I think that Squarespace is worth doing.
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of want to open this up for questions. Sure, go ahead.
I have a mic over here, so.
Oh, great, we have mics.
Great.
Hi, Anthony. Welcome to FIT.
Hi.
So
I used to live across the street, by the way.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, when I first moved to New York, 2067.
My question is, how do you recall your first pitch that you gave to your first client, and how hard did you work on that pitch for that person to understand overall what you were trying to get at to win the business?
So it's not like I was pitching a client, but I'll take that idea and kind of answer something similar. So I mean, Squarespace is a self-service thing. So you go online, we had some Google AdWords, and you go and you sign up, and hopefully you like it, and that's it. So if you think of a pitch in terms of the front site, I thought a lot about how it was presented, what the value prop is, and how it's going to be seen, and why somebody would even pay for this thing versus getting things for free. I mean, we've existed in a market where there's plenty of free alternatives to Squarespace, and there always have been. And we need to really justify our existence if we're going to charge money for it. So I thought a lot about it. Is the answer?
Did that answer your question?
Well, I wanted a little bit more but I can get them downstairs.
No, is there a clarifying? I mean, what?
No, because my thing is, I'm not in your market, but I want to launch my type of business. But my fear is that approachness, how to win that first customer, how to win and how to attract that number one, because all you need is one, and after one, things will develop. But it's that confidence that you need for that platform to roll out. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, our first customers were really all over the place. I mean, I was getting them from Google AdWords, so it was just these very, very different use cases. And they were all within blogging. So, I mean, it's really going to depend on your market and where you're trying to put things. Again, I wouldn't pretend to know the first thing about launching like a fashion label and trying to attract the first customer to that. But again, I said this earlier, but being part of certain small communities where there's going to be interest in what you do is going to be really important. I think that if you're small, one of the things you can sell is a story versus, like an Amazon that's really not selling you on a story for any individual product. I mean, think about the small brands that you really like. You buy into the story, it seems like there's a lot of care taken on something, seems handmade, seems nice, all the details are considered, and that becomes a compelling reason for somebody to buy something small. Otherwise, what's the difference?
So just kind of following up on that, some Google AdWords can feel very spammy.
Yeah.
How were you able to compose something that made people want to click on it?
I think Google AdWords just are kind of spammy. I mean, Google, it lets you A/B test things very, very quickly. So you can just put stuff out there that you think is good, and it'll actually auto sort through on click rates and all that, and then you can track which AdWords are leading to conversions and which aren't. But I mean, it's really up to you to kind of not be a spammer.
Yeah. And iterate on it. So I like that you hit on that part. We have a question right here.
Hi. So I was in college around the same time that you were in college, and there was no Facebook, or my college wasn't accepted into Facebook at that time, or they were developing it. I'm not sure. So
I don't think mine was either.
Yeah. And thank goodness for me. But anyways, since you were saying you're trying to develop a website for people's identity or that was your thought process in 2003, and Facebook essentially was making that same thing. I wasn't aware of them at the time until like towards the end, or once we got accepted. But did you know about them? Like, were you just doing your website creation?
I think
based on,
Facebook
like,
started,
yourself?
embarrassingly for Squarespace, Facebook started after Squarespace.
Okay.
It wasn't like a consideration. I mean, it always seemed like a very separate thing to me. I mean, Facebook's a very controlled environment. You really can't do whatever you want. You don't own that identity. Facebook basically owns that identity and the presentation of it and the ads and everything else. So in terms of an identity platform, depending on what your requirements are for your identity, Facebook might be fine. But generally, Squarespace is sort of this kind of move out of your parents' basement, time to grow up, like you control everything, you pay $8 and you own it. It's more of a professional presentation of your identity.
Okay, cool. I have another question quickly. Is also at that time, smartphones didn't exist either.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that that's helped your platform more now that people will look at a website on their phone versus when you were thinking about it back in the day when there was no smartphone?
So it's certainly a huge deal. And we're lucky enough to have recreated, so we made this huge bet about 3 years ago that we actually recreated Squarespace. So Squarespace 5 was what we had online for a long time, and then we launched Squarespace 6, which is the product you see online today to fundamentally transform the entire business. But luckily, Squarespace 6 was being created in a world where there were already iPhones, there were already Android phones. And so we knew from the beginning that every single template had to be completely responsive and, operate in this new world. There was sort of like no questions that that was going to be what we needed to create. So we're lucky in the sense that we were doing that at the same time. Otherwise, I think that smartphones proliferating would have been hard because we would have been working off of this product that didn't exist in a world where that was the case. And so changes needed to be made. But yeah, so it would have probably hurt us or at least created more work.
Are there any particular strategies or target segments that have been particularly helpful in terms of user acquisition?
Yeah. So one of the places that we do a lot of advertising, which is always very surprising to people, is in podcasting. So how many people have heard of us, Squarespace on a podcast? Couple? All right, there's a few. Timidly raising your hands. All right, so let's give that about 30%. So podcasts have worked out really well for us because essentially people form a connection with a show host, and then having that host endorse Squarespace, even in a paid way. We don't hide it when we're buying these placements. Is a really, really powerful connection if they can, if the host genuinely likes the product and they can speak about it authentically. And I think that translates into all mediums. I mean, if you have somebody who, look in fashion how important it is for certain celebrities to be wearing certain brands and all of the tension and everything that focuses on that. That's similar, right? People like a person, they like their style, and that person is doing buying a certain kind of clothing, and so they follow. So I think that's been effective to get people to get certain personalities to authentically like what you're doing.
Sorry, one more question.
Question?
What kind of work have you chosen to contract? And I don't think those are posted on the career site, is it?
Like what does Squarespace contract out currently?
Yeah, for work. And then how would you find out about it if it's not on the career site?
As in, what professional services do we contract with developers? Do you mean like that?
Yeah, rather than employing it,
In-house?
employing in-house, like the work that you're contracting out.
Right now, our contracting is limited to basically this. There are a couple specialized, highly talented engineers that for personal reasons cannot, like family reasons, visa reasons, cannot move to the United States and work in New York. And we'll sometimes make exceptions for that, sometimes. The other thing that we sometimes contract out is when we're doing the advertising campaigns, sometimes creatives that like our chief creative officer has worked with, or very key individual contributors, again, like super highly talented, that want a diversity of work, we'll sometimes contract that stuff out as well. TV media buying, it's like, that's it.
I have one question. I don't know, I'm sure it's not just me. There's a whole trend now of older people wanting to start a business, and we're not, well, for the most part, we're not as savvy as young people on the computer. And I looked at your website, and it is a beautiful site. I looked at it last night. But I'm afraid to try it because I'm terrible. And I'm just wondering, do you have a service where, of course, we would pay to come to your office and help set it up?
Sure.
In other words, not help, you would do it.
No, right.
Completely. With my ideas, you know. Well,
Yeah, so
both my
here's
ideas.
it's a great question. So first off, don't be afraid to try it, right? Because it's free, so you've lost nothing. You know, and it may be easier than you think, maybe harder than you think. There's a lot of help materials online. There's a lot of video walkthroughs where people will, you know, go and start a video on YouTube, and they'll show you exactly where to click and what to do, which has been really great for us. The other thing we do is we have a specialist directory at specialist.squarespace.com. You can find it right from our front site in the nav. Where, given your price range, given what you want done, we'll connect you with somebody in the community who is going to be able to help with that. So, some might work in person, some might work online. But you know, it'll be anything from a setup expert, which will charge at least like $500 to kind of get the site online for you, all the way to, you know, there's fantastic design agencies in there which will only accept projects that are like $40,000, for instance. So it's everything in the middle, and you can kind of look around and reach out to people, but that's the best spot for connecting with that kind of community. One hilarious thing pops into mind. Does anyone know what TaskRabbit is? Heard of that? No? Okay, so TaskRabbit's this little thing where you can get someone to basically do a chore for you. Okay, and I did this one time in my life. I had somebody wait in line for the Apple Store for an iPhone for me. It's ridiculous. It was like $60.
That's such a good idea.
It's a great idea. And when I was on this list, much to my surprise, so one of the open tasks was like, help me with my Squarespace website. And somebody was like, would pay like, you know, $40 an hour or something for it. And I don't know, you might look into something like that, just places where you can find people who are more technically savvy, who are willing to kind of go do that on an hourly rate, almost like training. But I'd be specific about what you want. Do you want training? Do you want setup help? Do you want a full design? And I think that if you use these different resources, yeah, you'll be able to sort out and find somebody who can do that. And also just try it yourself. You can always give up.
And just a yes or no question, just as part of it, do you accept payments from customers? In other words, does your site, yeah, for, you know, you take your share and I take mine.
Oh, as in like you were setting up a store?
Yeah, like I was setting up a store instead of PayPal, for example.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so we have a great commerce platform. You know, our sellers have sold in the past year like around $50 million in sales across the whole platform, and we don't take a cut. So yeah, it's all yours to keep. The only cut that you would pay is we have a payment gateway called Stripe, which you set up for, and that's exactly how you set up. That's like the PayPal equivalent. It's like it helps you accept MasterCard, American Express, and Visa, and all that. They would take like a 2.9% and 30 cents on a transaction. I don't know the current rate, but it's something like PayPal, and that's really the only per percentage transaction you would have to pay out. So Squarespace doesn't take a percentage.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Right here.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So I am an entrepreneur, but also faculty at FIT. And just in response to the woman in the front row, I have to say 4 days ago, I went on to Squarespace. Those subway ads are amazing.
Nice.
So I went on to Squarespace 4 days ago, and though I have not finished my website, I have to tell you, everything is drag and drop. Everything is much easier, and I won't use the WP other platform to use. That's terrible and incredibly difficult for people who are not tech savvy, but I'm not tech savvy.
That's great.
And Squarespace has been wonderful. So talk to me again in a week when it's done, or at least more done. But it's much easier than I think you'd think.
Thank you very much.
It's funny
Sure.
because my website's also on Squarespace. So my personal website, daliastrum.com, and it's literally drag and drop. It's very simple to set up. You don't have, and you choose from any of the templates. So you design it how you choose.
Great.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is my friend Renusha. We're actually starting a company now within the next couple of months. We're going to use Squarespace, so it's been really nice to sit here and listen to everything that you've had to say today. My question is more in relation to like business, because I think what we're struggling with right now is pricing strategy or pricing model. So just our service isn't going to be anything like Squarespace, but I would still be interested in knowing sort of like how did you find that right model that worked for you?
In terms of pricing the service?
Right.
Yeah. Really difficult. It's a really difficult question. So we've changed strategies over time with the pricing. Right now, our pricing is set where we're trying to be as competitive as possible and make it as cheap as possible. We also sell like electricity essentially, right? I mean, like what's a website? It's electricity. So our fixed costs are very different than if you're selling a physical product. But I would try and look at the options available to somebody and try and figure out, all right, I've got $10 to spend, or I've got $100 to spend, or $500 to spend, and I'm in the market for whatever you're going to be selling. What are my options, really? You know, can I get like, if you're selling hats, can I get like 3 hats for the price of 1 hat? Are they going to be better quality or worse quality? And try and be objective about what the money will be, you know, what you're actually pricing things at. I'd actually also say, don't be afraid to, so this more applies to an internet company, but I'll say it like this and then it translates to yours. Hey, don't be afraid to charge money. I think a lot of people in the internet space like have to put everything up for free and it's all freemium. They think that's a good idea. I'm not sure I do. I think that if you're creating something of value, it's totally fine to charge money for it, and it's totally fine that some people are going to walk away because it's too expensive. As long as you have other people who aren't, and you're getting enough of them, that's really good. Squarespace's scale has the benefit of being able to do these random huge tests on like, you know, let's make it $9 and $8 and $10 and then make the discount this and that. And we have all these people coming in, this is huge sample sizes, right? So you don't have that benefit, so you've got to go off these like sort of feelings around what people's options are and how you want to be perceived due to price. We think about everything on price, even down to if we display cents or not, right? Like if you're at a nice restaurant, do you see $7.95? No, it sends a signal. So we cut it to 7 or leave it at 8, right? So everything about how you present a price, present a number, when you present it is going to be a really big deal.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We have a couple of questions also in the front.
Okay, I'll go. First of all, thank you so much for sponsoring my favorite podcast, which is called Good Job Brain. It's
Great.
Wonderful. But I'm also curious, a lot of your ads seem to target creative, so especially the Subway ads. It's all like chefs and fashion designers. So I'm just wondering what was the decision behind trying to target creatives, because there's so many other businesses that could use Squarespace.
It's a great question. So we got to do something, right? Because we don't want to be generic, and we think that the creative market, again, from this notion of building things for ourselves, like we're kind of those people, and so we wanted to make something that we wanted, and I think it was just a very natural like first step for us. Like what you're talking is actually really, really hard to answer, which is this sort of transition between really us focusing on a niche and us focusing on the rest of the world. But I think the great things about targeting creatives, twofold. One, these are influencers. These are the people who people go to for advice and say, hey, you make things, how do I make things, right? And they're a very do-it-yourself community. And it's very aspirational. And then the other thing is, you know, I think that everyone is creative in some way, right? I mean, if you're a small law firm, I'll bet that you have to be creative in some way to sell your services to people. I mean, everyone has an identity and has a different take on how they want to do things, and we're just about supporting that, right? So it's not that it'll only work for artists, musicians, and chefs, but that's the angle we take in that's a little bit more emotional and a little bit more, you know, that's kind of who we're after. But it's very hard to get right, and I'm not sure we even have it right. So.
Hello.
Hi.
I noticed that your templates are really of high quality.
Can you hold the...
Okay, your templates are of really high quality. So is this the work of the design group or the product group, or do you hire non-techie design creative people to get your input?
Good question. So it's a group effort. So we have a template design team that has designers. Some of them understand HTML and CSS, some sort of don't. We find that we get better results when they do, because they understand the medium that they're working with, as opposed to just being a raw graphic designer. But it's a group effort. You know, the entire company, I mean, everything enables this thing, from the technical architecture, which defines the language that the template designers can use, to the coders, to how it's going to be presented. And so we have a whole group internally that does it with a variety of skill sets.
I had one more question.
Sure.
So, like the extensive marketing you're doing, do you think it really is the game changer for Squarespace?
Is what the game changer for Squarespace?
The marketing you're doing.
The marketing?
Yeah.
Look, Squarespace started with the product. It started with engineering, it started with design, it started with creating something. And then for a very long time, my biggest, and anyone who's running a technology company's probably biggest fear, is that you make the best thing that no one's ever heard of. And so the marketing needs to go on top of that and make sure that people hear about Squarespace and that we don't fall behind, right? Because the company will fall behind. It has to. It's a technology company. You can't sort of sit still. You have to always innovate. So I think it's those three things running in parallel that make Squarespace successful. It's the marketing, it's the design, and it's the engineering. And without any one of those, Squarespace wouldn't really be what it is.
There was a question right behind. Can you just pass it by?
My question was marketing related. Just building up a following when you are an unknown service or website, and just traffic flow. How did you build it up to? I know you mentioned marketing. How did you build it up? As I know you mentioned podcasts and the Google AdWords, but were there any other ways?
Early on, and I'm talking about like 2004. Just ancient. A lot of it did come off of Google AdWords. A lot of it came from paying for some of it. But we always track that spend very closely. So we had to make sure it was working. Otherwise, if we just spent a bunch of money on marketing and nobody came, ran out of money. So a lot of it really came from that. And then now we just took all these leaps into podcasting and outdoor and commercials and everything else. But I do see a lot of small sites get started, right? And people are always wondering, how do I get traffic for the site? I think contributing back to a community in some way is a really good way to do that. Guest articles, comments that are very intelligent on blogs that also include a link in your profile to your site. Just giving people, trying to give, right?
Thank you.
Sure.
When starting a small business, what do you suggest to people to have on their website to communicate their brand and attract the customers that they want?
I think that you have to spend a lot of time thinking about how you get your message across succinctly, and why you're different, why anyone would even care about it, you know? And so just making sure, because people are just, I mean, they're really just rolling through pages, they're really going very, very quickly. And so saying something distinct, unique, it's going to be really, really important. The other thing that was a really big deal for us is creating a mood around the brand, right? And our front site sort of sets a tone. And we're very much about trying to make that emotional impact before we try and make a logical one. I mean, Squarespace, if you go to the front site, there's this thing called full feature index where it's like everything the thing does. I mean, Squarespace does hundreds of things. And we don't talk about any of it in the beginning, right? It's just about, hey, it's pretty. It's websites. Want a website? Want to be pretty? Okay, let's go from there, right? And it's just about leading you through those steps very naturally instead of inundating you with, you know, a bunch of text or features or anything like that. The full feature index is very interesting. The strategy is actually to overwhelm you because anyone who's looking for something at that level of detail has probably got a bunch of questions about what it does. So it's like, okay, we're going to list every single thing so that you know that this thing is robust. It's not just pretty. And if you're what I call like a single issue voter, and you're looking for one thing, you can go and find it. But yeah, I think that succinctness and creating a mood is very, very important.
How do you research trends or, I suppose, like anticipate what the next thing is that customers, specifically your customers, are looking for in a tech service? Yeah,
this happens a lot in templates, right? Because the product we're selling is, a lot of it's the template, right? I mean, the technical architecture is just, we created it because we've been making content management systems for a decade. And so we have our own ideas about what that should be like. Or things fall into that ideation narrative and it's like, yeah, is it some big surprise that small businesses need to sell things? No. Do they need to keep in touch with their customers? No. They need analytics? No. These are all easy. But for the templates, where it's much more style-oriented, there are a number of blogs that we look at and review sites and other things where we're constantly watching for things that we think are beautiful or unique or different and just creating basically these huge like scrapbooks almost of it all. And really trying to boil these things down into the essence of what they are. I remember, you know, going through portfolio templates initially for Squarespace 6 and really just taking 200 sites and putting them up on a wall and being like, there are really only like 5 different patterns here. You know, there are all these 5 things. It all goes back to these 5 things. And so it's something I rely on my team leads for and executives for to determine, you know, to have a certain level of taste. And taste is due to context, right? It's by experiencing all these things and picking out the details of a couple that are unique. And so that's how we stay on top of it. There's no like magic formula, unfortunately. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Cool. Yeah.
If I wanted music on the website, is
Mhm.
there a copyright I have to consider?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So using imagery or music on your site or anything that's made by someone else, you have to consider copyright. I actually don't know. Usually we're operating through an agency when we license music, so I don't know how it works. But if you're looking for like easy to license music, Getty Images, Shutterstock have libraries of media that's available, and the licensing is like spelled out, so anyone can go there and buy it and stuff like that. And I'm sure some of it's very expensive and some of it's not. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, guys.